Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin, eclectic album reviews and general music and meanderings. And I'm really excited about this week's prescription. It is
Rossz Csillag Alatt Született
by Venetian Snares. And you better bet that I practiced that for the last 2 weeks, so props. That album is a 2003 album, and it is not the first time that I've experienced Venetian Snares. Venetian Snares I discovered about 2 years ago in 2018 with an album called Traditional Synthesizer Music. And I really got into that album for many reasons. I have a post up on it. One of the main reasons being was that it was a very innovative use of modular synthesizers at the time. And that was how it was sort of presented to me and how I defined Venetian Snares up to that point. But after I listened to it for 2 years straight and still love it, I mean, it's on the way to being a classic album in my mind and in its own right, I kind of wanted to branch out and see what else Venetian Snares had to offer. Venetian Snares is the project of Aaron Funk. And since beginning his career in 1993, there's been periods where he's been extremely prolific, sometimes releasing up to 3 albums at a time. So if you look over at his Bandcamp page, there's currently, I think, 50 albums available just through Bandcamp. And I think if you look around, there's way, way more than that. So taking the next step into his catalog was kind of a daunting task. But I turned over some rocks, did a little bit of looking around. And it turns out that this album,
Rossz Csillag Alatt Született,
got quite a bit of critical acclaim. Whenever I actually sat down and checked it out, I was immediately grabbed by it. And not because it had such a quick connection with traditional synthesizer music, the album, but because it was a contrast to it. Rather than the really super hyperactive electronic kind of Moog synthesizer textures that he was using on traditional synthesizer music, this was this fascinating, arcane almost, but electrifying juxtaposition of classical music and breakbeat, and immediately grabbed my attention to it. The album itself was created in response to a trip that Aaron Funk took to Hungary, and so hence the title. The title is a Hungarian phrase, and all the song titles on the album are in Hungarian. The Hungarian phrase translates into English as "born under a bad star," which I think kind of translates to being cursed from birth. It doesn't take translating that phrase to kind of catch the bleak tone that this album sets for itself. The seed that inspired this album was Aaron Funk having this idea about what it was like to be a pigeon flying around the royal palace at Budapest, which seems like it might evoke a lighter tone. But in truth, the album feels like an exploration of almost anxiety and depression. And there has been some speculation I've seen online as to whether there's a storyline in this album. I think that you'd be hard-pressed it would be quite a bit of imagination to fill in the blanks enough to really put a storyline in on the album. But there's definitely a theme that runs throughout the album in terms of its narrative that I think is noticeable and definitely one of the major factors to the album's overall success. And it feels like there's some real kind of musical alchemy going on here. As I stated before, the album sort of, as it's on the surface level, plays with this very interesting juxtaposition of classical orchestral music and high intensity breakbeat music. And whenever I talk about classical music, it's not like necessarily the big thematic orchestral stuff that you'd hear like in a movie score. It feels almost like chamber style, maybe even Baroque at times, or maybe even kind of like a little more strident 20th century music. It's not your mainstream necessarily feel good, triumphant style, orchestral music. And in relationship to the more breakbeat side of things, you can definitely see Aaron Funk's mastery over the whole classic Amen breakbeat and programming exciting, electrifying rhythms to undergird this big ambient orchestral style that's going on with it. Now, those are the two main things that are happening on the album. There's also this kind of like sprinkling of Hungarian folk music and also some spoken word stuff in there. And truth of the matter is, all of these different parts of the album, even though they play off each other a lot, they all have a chance to sort of take center stage. And so there's parts on this album where actually there's just straight up what sounds like orchestral music. Aaron Funk's vision for this album is to take these four different genres and fit them together in a way that works, and in a way that's unique, I believe. And so his mastery of being a sort of a programmer of amazing beats is one thing, but then the samples that he uses for strings are very, very, very convincing. I am still wondering if there's parts in there where he had live strings come in and play. It's hard to say. And he's able to also smooth this all out with some very carefully crafted synth patches. And that is the kind of the piece that holds everything together, gives it a sense of continuity. Because when you start taking samples from other things, there's always the danger of making it sound like these samples don't fit together. But you never get that sense because he's able to at the foundation provide this very subtle but very well-crafted string synth background that really holds everything together in a really super convincing fashion. The album takes these bleak, melancholy, and introspective soundscapes and just electrifies them with these intense breakbeats. And it's a juxtaposition not only in the styles, but also in the way that you resonate with the album, the way it makes you feel, because at the one side it's very somber, but it's also very driving, almost to the point where it feels like this inner turmoil that the listener experiences going through it. If you follow the energy of any of these one given songs, it can be kind of an intense experience, you know. As you travel through any given one of these songs, they very rarely sound at the end like they do in the beginning. You know, there will be a very clear orchestral theme that's presented at the beginning, and over the course of 3 to 6 minutes, Aaron Funk will go through and he'll give some variants and change it around a bit. But by the end, usually he's completely deconstructed what he started with. And so you can hear these scraps of the initial theme from the beginning of the song, still there in a sort of a hyper-electric deconstruction, but still present, still there, still giving them the sense of cohesiveness throughout the entire piece. This is the one part of this that I would say that this deconstruction goes on just a little bit too long. It's the one part of the album I think isn't quite as effective because it just peaks too soon. And that's in the track, which at about 4:30 in the song, it completely breaks down to just kind of like crazy electronic gibberish noise, which is fine in and of itself, and the noise has its place on an album like this for sure. But then it goes on for 1.5 minutes at full volume. I think that Aaron Funk is totally aware that he's doing this because there's a point where he stops and then he starts to back up. Then it's this big explosion of electronic craziness. So, and as you're listening to it, I feel like that just goes on a little bit too long. It peaks too soon. But again, because it's intentional, you have to respect what he's trying to do with that. Now, although most of the album is instrumental or presents itself as mostly instrumental with some spoken word in there, there is a track that, if you think about it, kind of stands out a little bit. And that's the track, which, if you translate it, means Suicidal Sunday. The song that Aaron Funk is sampling in this is a song called Gloomy Sunday. And the version that he is sampling originally was done by Billie Holiday. But the original version of the song goes even further back than Billie Holiday. It was originally written by a Hungarian singer who was writing a song about the toils of war or something. And then those lyrics were rewritten by another person who included the protagonist in the song committing suicide. So this song became kind of known as the suicide songs. And urban legend has it that this song has contributed to many people choosing to end their own lives as listening to the song. Now, there's really been no confirmed reports of that, but the story of the song, the legend of the song, and this particular song, especially after it was translated in English and then covered by Billie Holiday, has been covered hundreds of times. Many people have covered this song throughout history. Even more recently, it's shown up in some European song contests. So, really interesting background with this song, and of course, that background is probably not unnoticed by Aaron Funk, and it's kind of depressing, sad, melancholy feel, and its message certainly sets the tone for the album in a very real way, but also doesn't take away from it. And even though it's not purely orchestral, Billie Holiday's style was a little bit more like jazz orchestra than the rest of the album. It really blends in very, very well. He uses those synth strings to blend it together. And this 1930s, 1940s clarinets come in. It still feels like that kind of orchestral sound. Plus, his rendition of this song is in 7. And so I've heard it so many times now in this 7 that hearing the original one, when I went back and listened to the original song that Billie Holiday did, listening to it in a more standard 4/4 beat seemed very weird. It's really pretty incredible how Aaron Funk was able to listen to that and notice how the phrasing would work well in 7 and then sell it so well in that time signature. It's a fascinating way that his perception of the song was able to shift and make it so convincing in a time signature different than the one that it was written in. If there were to be a single on this album, I would say that's the one. It's like this really cool cross between like Portishead and DJ Shadow with a lot more hyperactive drums. And I love that song, and I love the rest of this album. It has compelled me to come back to it over and over again over the course of this year and really delved pretty far into it. And I never seem to get tired of it. And all of its various, extremes, as far as having straight up classical music on it, all the way up through its more cacophonous moments. The album works very well from beginning to end. It's a pretty ingenious piece of work, and actually in some ways makes me even more nervous about stepping even further into the Venetian Snares circle, because that's 2 albums by him now that I think are brilliant, like for me, life-changing discs quite possibly. And so I'm now even more apprehensive about taking a step and finding out that there's maybe things that aren't as good as these things that he's put out. But I would highly, highly suggest checking this album out.
Rossz Csillag Alatt Született.
2003 by Venetian Snares. So that's all I got on this album. So please make sure you get a chance to like it and subscribe to the post if you want to find out when other things are coming up. Follow me on Spotify. I put up this track and maybe a couple of others over on a list there called Best of 2020. Next week I'm going to come back at you with something that I'm listening to. And until then, catch you on the flip side.